3.
Good morning, everybody. Actually, good afternoon on your side. We're here live from Boston, Massachusetts, United States, and welcome everyone in India. We're happy to be talking to you today about the startup equation. My name's Steve Fisher. This is Ja-Naé, Duane. We're co-authors of the book, and let's just dive right in. Ja-Naé?
Yes, no, it sounds good. So as we wait for our presentation to come on up, so welcome to Building Your Startup from Scratch. The context is based on the following concepts and processes in the book, The Startup Equation. And before we dive in, why don't we tell you a little bit about ourselves. So I am a serial entrepreneur. I'm also, I work with corporate innovation. I have had 3 businesses. I've also written 3 books, and I'm a professor of entrepreneurship now at 3 universities. So Emerson and Clark, I am an entrepreneur in residence. Steve?
So I've also been a serial entrepreneur. I've done a number of businesses, and also one of them also being a nonprofit film project. I've been a product designer for the last 20 years. I've built over 100 products, and my passion is helping entrepreneurs and teaching them what the things that I wish that I knew. I do that as an advisor, an angel investor, and obviously the co-author of the book.
So a little bit about what we're going to cover throughout this webinar. We're going to dive into what is now the age of the entrepreneur. We're also going to talk about the 6 forces of change that are impacting entrepreneurs and just humans in general. We will also dive into what is your startup path and how do you start to shape that. And then what are the tools that you can use to start to grow your business from scratch. And then we'll talk about leveraging the startup equation and then our mission of helping 1 million entrepreneurs. So with that, why don't we get started?
Yeah. So, you guys are in one of the largest growing markets for entrepreneurship in the world. And, we've done a lot of research for the book, talking to a lot of entrepreneurs all over the world. And the concept of being an entrepreneur, is nothing new. And we dare to say it's actually the world's second oldest profession. The personal qualities and the passion to create something new, something better, along with the ability to take a calculated risk, is where others won't tread, is what really separates the entrepreneur from the worker. So over the past 200 years, the acceleration of industry has created a new class of entrepreneurs. Just in this decade alone, the pace and opportunity to start a business has increased exponentially. So it's the age of the entrepreneur, and it's an exciting time to have an idea with the entire planet as your potential customer. Right now there are globally about 380 million entrepreneurs. It means in a network of about 100 people, you probably know at least 5. So with people living longer than before, the growth, it's the largest surplus of workers in the next 10 years. Unfortunately, though, with automation, there's job choices are diminished. People will be finding themselves adapting to entrepreneurship. This, according to the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, they expect to see an average of 1 billion more entrepreneurs in the next 10 years. So that's 1 billion entrepreneurs by 2020. That's amazing. Of that 1 billion, many will be women. Global Entrepreneurship Monitor found that in a 3.5-year period, there's 126 million women started started a business, and 98 million operated established businesses. That's 224 million women impacting the global economy. I mean, this is huge impact. When you think of the planet Earth as the highest entrepreneurship rates come from India, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America, also known as the Global South. You can see that the rates and the attitudes of where you are is ripe for supporting entrepreneurship. So this shift, as you work on your startup idea, one of the things that we've worked on in the book is we've identified 6 forces of change. And just to kind of go over them briefly, the liquid workforce how you're able to find dynamic workers and be able to move in and out of using them for various tasks. You know, the new work order is all types of spaces like co-working. You know, the connected, engaged customer. There are so many different channels in which to reach out to your customer and leverage them. And the number 4, the era of the maker, is about, you know, using things like 3D printing, other types of micro prototyping, and, you know, really bringing impact into your prototypes. The sharing economy, number 5, you guys are familiar with Uber or Airbnb. It's either participating in it or creating a company that actually is a part of it. And then lastly, there's a new creative economy. So those of you out there that are freelancers, that are designers, you know, any kind of creative class, you can either participate or build a company within the, you know, within India. So what I'm going to do is, you know, so before you build your startup, you should know thyself.
Yeah, and when we talk about building a startup, it really starts with who you are as an entrepreneur and knowing what it is, not only that is important to you, but also where you are in your life today. Where you were, say, 5-10 years ago is completely different from where you are today. So some questions to ask yourself are, you know, what are your passions and what are your interests? How frequently do you actually finish products or projects rather? And that's important. It's one thing to start a business, but it's another thing to see it all the way through and to even know where is the end? Where is your exit? You know, is this a lifestyle of business or is this a business that you're trying to build and sell? Why are you actually starting a business? What is it about starting a business? Is it out of necessity? Is it because of the fact that you want to build something great? Knowing the why is going to be key. And then are you a builder of things? Do you love to start those things? Or do you prefer to maintain something that already exists? Also, describe to yourself, write this down. What is your comfort level with risk? Because being an entrepreneur has a certain level of risk, and that is really dependent on the type of business that you're starting, but then also really, you know, whether or not you have to put money in, whether or not you need a lot of money to start your type of business. So that it can be really a big variable for people. Also, how much time are you willing to commit? Being an entrepreneur is more than a full-time job. So knowing that you have the time that it takes to actually put into the business is huge. And where do you want to be 3 years from now? And really outlining that for yourself. Uncovering what these answers are will help you understand really what is important to you and then also where are you for today. So when we think about the entrepreneur and the way to help sort of streamline this approach is that we've created this mini equation to help guide you. So really it's your personality or your entrepreneurial personality, which we'll get into, plus your approach to starting a business, which is what your startup path is. So let's dive into the different types of entrepreneurial types. So there are 9 different entrepreneurial types, and I'll run through them. So for the perfectionist, this is a person who needs to really make sure that everything gets done perfectly. They are practical, but they really strive for deadlines and schedules. They want to avoid errors. The giver wants to gain approval, feels that there's this sense of pride in being needed, but they're humble and they crave freedom. When we talk about the performer, now the performer loves the spotlight, and it's really sort of that instant expert or captain. They are very hopeful and they are sort of self-survival thinkers in a way. When we get into the romantic, now this is a person who wants creativity, sort of craves freedom, but is also, their sweet spot is around uniqueness. They're searching for uniqueness in everything that they do. The next one is the observer. So for the observer, you know, For the observer, it's really about sort of sitting back, taking in as much as possible. They like boundaries, so they like to know where they stand, where everyone else stands. They're minimalistic. They believe in a balance of power. When we dig into the next slide, we also have the trooper. So for the trooper, this is someone who has strong analytical powers. They believe in overcoming adversity. They're really focused on call to actions and want visible success. The epicure is someone who wants to keep energy up, and it's all about the experience and creating that experience. And they seek stimulation, and they love to diffuse fear. We also have the boss. Now, the boss is concerned with injustices in the world, has sort of this lust for life, but believes in truth and control. And then our last one is the mediator. This is someone who maintains neutrality and really, at the end of the day, cannot say no. But it's all about structure and keeping the peace. Now, of these 9 entrepreneurial types, you will have one dominant that is really sort of the core of who you are as a person and as an entrepreneur. And though you may relate to others, that's okay. Imagine those as secondaries, if you will. But you will have one core entrepreneurial type. And it's important to know so that you know really what is your personality like, what do you prefer to focus on, and then what are some of those strengths and some of those weaknesses. So now we'll get into the entrepreneurial approaches. Now, these are the ways that you can approach your business. And it's important to know this ahead of time for one big reason. At the end of the day, what we see, and one of the main reasons why we see entrepreneurs ultimately fail, is because of the fact that they get so excited to start, but they don't actually know where they're going or how they're building this business. Like, what is that end state for that company? So knowing why or how you're approaching this business is going to also help shape your business model. And Steve would love to talk.
Yeah, so Ja-Naé and I have met a lot of entrepreneurs over the last, decade or so, and for this book, we interviewed a ton of them, and from our own experiences, one of the things that, just to kind of go back real quick is that when you look at these types and approaches, this is your startup path. Knowing who you are, knowing what you want to build, it really will drive, as we go through the rest of the presentation, what are you looking for in co-founders, what kind of team you'll need to build, because especially if you just want to create a great, maybe say you want to build a marketing agency, and then maybe that marketing agency is 50 people, that's great. And that's a wonderful business. That is what has built India, these small businesses, these great small businesses. It's what built America. It's what built many successful countries and successful economies. But, there's always the people that you want to build an Uber, you want to build a Facebook. So understanding that and aligning yourself with that, it goes beyond the vision, but also knowing who you are. So, I just wanted to also mention on a technical note, if some of you may be having some bandwidth issues, this is being recorded, so you guys can go back, watch it on a better place if you're having it. We appreciate you. Sorry if there's any issues. So this is being recorded for you guys, so you can go back and watch this maybe in a better place. So I'll hand it back to Ja-Naé.
So with that, we need to go back one and talk about these entrepreneurial approaches.
Okay.
So the essentialist, this is really an entrepreneur or an approach when you have to start a business out of a necessity. So maybe you've lost a job and it's sort of forcing you to become an entrepreneur. This entrepreneurial type is actually going to rise throughout the next decade because of the change in the way that we work. We also have the do-gooder. Now, this is the entrepreneur that wants to change the world, wants to have some type of major social impact, and that is their lead cause. We also have the expert. Now, this might be a lawyer, this may be a doctor, an architect, a programmer, someone who specializes in a field. Also, being an artist is being an entrepreneur, because if you have to sell your art or sell yourself as an artist, then that's being an entrepreneur. So these are entrepreneurs who focus more on being an artisan first and being an artist first rather than being an entrepreneur. And their number one focus is to create. We also have the franchisee. So this is a person who doesn't like to necessarily build, but prefers to maintain and wants that business solution almost in a package already ready for them to just sort of uncover and start to roll out, that someone else has put those systems into place. We also have the builder. Now, this is a person who seeks opportunities, that seeks and looks at different trends and says, okay, what can we build that we can essentially grow and eventually sell? So the builder is usually the person who is going to sell a company of all these entrepreneurial approaches. And then we have the lifestylist. Now, this is a person who just wants the lifestyle of living an entrepreneur. Maybe you want the freedom. Maybe freedom is something that you crave. And you want to be able to do your work from anywhere in the world. Well, you would be considered a micro-entrepreneur or a lifestylist. So all this is great, but, I mean, at the end of the day, where do we go from here? So you'll see that there are 4 basic tools that we're going to talk about today, and there are many, many more tools within the book. But these are 4 basic tools that are going to help you build your startup from scratch. And that's ideation, identifying the problem to come up with an idea for your business solution. And then we're going to talk about MVPs, creating a minimal viable product. And then we're going to get into our baseboard and how do you start to do some testing.
So, ideation. So you can see that quite artistic sketch of, coming up with the idea. When you think about ideas, there's a whole process behind it. Everyone's got a great idea. Everyone's got an idea for a business. Many people have many ideas for a business. And actually, that's a key part of the ideation process. Working through the idea, generating, developing, and communicating the ideas. So where you can not only understand it, but also to really distill it in a way that focuses on, this is the business that I'm going to go after. And and when you think about it, this is also whether it could be visual in a concrete way or an abstraction layer. So ideation, at its core, is identifying the problem to uncover the opportunity. And this is really the heart of your startup. You can have a great business, but all great businesses start by identifying the problem to uncover the opportunity. So let's look at, you guys have Uber in India. We have Uber in a lot of places. Uber's a great example to point to. What did they really identify? They identified that right now there are people that want to be able to quickly access transportation with their mobile in a seamless, we call this, and this is what I like to call frictionless commerce. They can know where the driver knows where they are. They know who the driver is. The transaction's done. Their credit card's already in there. They don't have to deal with negotiation, being ripped off, any of that. And then from there, on the flip side, it allows people who want to add to their income. I'll have to tell you, here in the United States, there are so many Uber drivers we've met in our travels. We try and use it in every chance we get as we're building the startup equation. We like to use startups as part of our we kind of live it and breathe it. Many people who are retired, many people who are students, people who are augmenting their income. But what Uber did was they identified that there was a real challenge, and they uncovered this opportunity. It will change over time. We can talk about examples for the rest of this hour, but I want you to really take this in as we kind of stare at the wall of Post-it notes, is that it's through these walls of crazy ideas that there is that one that is the startup. So you may think you know the problem. You're looking at this here. For you don't know if you've ever gone camping, this is essentially a flint and a rock. This is how you spark, for not an intentional turn of phrase is sparking the idea, but it's also about how people actually created fire for thousands and thousands of years. So think of it. You may think you know the problem. It's a simple example, right? You strike these two together, you spark, create a fire. But it's really actually kind of inefficient. You have to keep striking and striking and striking. You have to have the thing in a perfect place. So think of it as your idea is, it may be at that kind of, or then the existing things that are out there. Maybe those kind of stone and flint solutions. So the whole point of ideation is exploring those alternatives to identify the problem as, it's consistent. And when you look at the impact, you discover that, how do you do that? Well, in the ideation process, there is a technique in design thinking called how might we's. And what you do is you pose a question, who that problem affects. You look at the target audience and you ask, do some research to see what the pain point people have. And you pose, how might we do X? How might we do Y? And look at, write 10 things down of how you might do that. And that will start to work through the solution itself to come up with going from that idea to the actual opportunity itself. So from there, if you had the flint and the stone and you were doing ideation, you might realize that there's maybe a consistent way to actually create ignition on a fire and come up with the idea for a match.
So once you have your idea, it's really important to test everything. And I cannot stress this enough. And I recommend testing through MVPs, or minimum viable products. And that's really where the MVP comes in. Because at the end of the day, when we think about our product or our service, we think about what that end product looks like. All the bells and the whistles, that unique finished product that, of course, everyone's going to want. But before we get to there, we need to make sure that the core of that product or that service is solid and something that we know works and something that we know people will buy. And that's the beauty of the MVP process.
So just a note on that. As a product designer, I love these two slides because this is what usually you think the business is going to be. And that may be that in a couple of years. But in order to really do it, yes, I love chocolate donuts. Everybody should probably love chocolate donuts. But really, you just need to make sure that you can create the donut. So think of it that way. You can add all the sprinkles and the flavorings and all the other features and functions later. But what is it that at its core that the customer can need so that you can test it out and know that this is going to be a successful venture, at least from a perspective of adoption from the customer?
So let's dig into what is the MVP process. So when we think about MVP, it's about building as minimally as possible whatever that core product or product or service is, and then going out and doing some testing with some of your target audience. And from there, learning from what they like, what they don't like, would they be willing to pay, and then building upon that. Or maybe you pivot on what that core product or service is based on your feedback. Now, I highly recommend that before you do MVP building and testing, you also do what we call MVC, and this is minimum viable concept. So once you have that idea, that sort of spark that you think, this is a problem that I see out there in the world that people need and that they'd be willing to pay for, take that product, or take that idea rather, and go and find who you think your target audience is and do some research. Ask them whether or not they like that idea, if that is a problem that they have, and if that is something that they're willing to either purchase or something that they'd be willing to invest in. Why this is important to do before doing an MVP is because building an MVP sometimes, depending on what it is and depending on what your version is, can cost you money. So really getting some confirmation and validation around your idea first before you even build the bones is really essential, so that you know, what are people thinking? Does this seem to resonate? And then you can go and build from there.
So a note on that, the MVP process, for those of you who've read Lean Startup, obviously this is where that come from. And what we've taken from this and brought into the book is the idea that you need to continue to iterate. You need to continue to evolve the product. But with a lot of the books out there, we saw that there was a lot of disconnected concepts, and there were a lot of incomplete concepts as well. One of them in particular was the business model canvas. So what we worked on, and we've worked on with clients, we've had our startups and workshops use, is what we call the baseboard. So, this is the traditional business model canvas. You guys, if you've ever read Business Model Generation, you're very familiar with this. It's a great tool. It's done a great job over the last decade, really helping people focus on certain aspects of the business model. But we felt it was really incomplete actually. So what we did is we created the baseboard. Now, there's a detailed one after this, but at a high level, what this is, I can't really draw like a laser beam here, but if you look at the bottom left, there's envisioning. And what envisioning does, it takes that entrepreneurial type that we talked about. It takes the idea that we talked about, but it moves into the opportunity. And for any of you that have done any kind of business classes, you're familiar with the SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. So, from translating the idea into the opportunity, looking at the marketplace and asking yourself, what do I need as a resource? So this activity of moving into strategy, there's all types. There's the overall goals, there's marketing and sales, operational strategy, financial strategy, go-to-market, value propositions. These are things that you have to really get a sense of first before you can then fill in the blanks for the actual operations. And we feel that a lot of the business model canvas fits into the operational aspect and we've also gone beyond that. When you think of key activities, players, relationships, yes, that's definitely a part of the canvas. But we also look at growth and scale and how do you actually go beyond the canvas, and go beyond the board into actually running the business and executing. So you can see here in the next slide that, and this is a tool that you can go to startupequation.com, and you can download. It's all in the book, but we have a lot of extra books and tools that you can actually run through this. So you can see here, I apologize, it's in small print here, but you can see that it moves through, it asks you those questions about when the board that we have, it's a blank board and it's a blank canvas. So it's a set of Creative Commons, so you guys can use this, bring it into your business, run through it. It's a core part of creating something from scratch because you have to distill the idea into actionable results and in terms of milestones. And we'll get into a little bit more about that in terms of action and milestones a little bit later in the presentation. So I want you to keep in mind that this is not something that you can hear my words, review this today, but for many of you that may already have the book, this is in here and goes through it in detail, runs through the exercises to help you do it. I invite you to revisit this every 6 months. Really work with your teams. Individual teams can do this. So it's a really powerful way to get people focused on not only the ideas and the strategy, but the action. So now that you've got the idea, now you've got a minimum viable product, and you've also put it into the context of a business model, who you want to sell it to, how you want to really measure results, you got to get it out there.
Yeah, so in order to do some testing, we recommend testing hypotheses that you have. So you think you know who your target audience is or who your target customer is. Run your MVC and or your MVP by them first. If it doesn't really resonate with who you think your target audience is, then try a different demographic. Maybe it's maybe instead of males from 27 to 35, it ends up being females from 27 to 35. So again, you may not know, and we all come to this process with a set of assumptions. So write down what your assumptions are around who your audience is and whether or not the value proposition of your business is something that resonates with them. And from those assumptions that you have, start testing what works and doesn't. When you want to test something, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to at least 20 different people that fit into that target audience, so that you have at least a small data set to work with, and then you can then iterate and fine tune your idea or your product or your service.
And I want to also caution to you guys, many times when people do startups and you're building this, it's the theme of this talk is about building from scratch. But remember, when you test things, don't just keep it in a group that you know is going to really like it. So beyond your parents, your family, well, they may love you or but your friends, you really have to go to the people that really are going to give you those honest feedback. Now, granted, there will be people that will never like what you do. There'll always be those people that, for whatever reason, jealousy, just don't get it. You don't want to dismiss that, but you want to understand that it's there. But you really also want the people who are out there, the greater part of the bell curve, that really will give you the honest feedback, so that as you refine, the confidence in your concept, the confidence in your product or service will build. So, when we were talking about putting this together for the audience, there were a lot of discussions, questions early on about funding. Not to get into a deep discussion about funding, there's a core set of things we'd like to share, because obviously the Indian market for venture capital, for funding, is very different from every others. And we studied about 200 different startup economies. You guys know your regions, specifically what might be out there. But just to kind of distill some general ideas, there's 4 kind of overall areas of funding right now. There's obviously friends and family. That can work in many places. Sometimes you don't even want to mix that stuff, because you don't even want to have any potential. If there's failure, there might be problems. You have angel investors. These are the people that have maybe cashed out, they've done some great things, they want to reinvest, they want to find the great opportunities, they want really great upside. And there's a lot of opportunities for finding angel investors. You just want to make sure that you have a right match, because it's a very personal connection, much more involved usually. And there's a right fit for it. But there's also, on the other side of it too, is crowdfunding. Over here in the United States, we have Kickstarter, we have Indiegogo, Rocket Hub, a number of other tools. I know there's a few, specifically in India. You might have used some of those, the sites that I mentioned as well. This is about delivery of something that you're getting the crowd to support. And this, again, is part of the testing, because if people will fund it, that's another part of testing your product. But it is a right fit for a certain amount of products. People won't fund your life. People won't fund basic businesses. They want something in return. And there are other things like bank loans, other grants, other types of investments and funding vehicles that, based on what you're trying to do, if it's for, maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it is a smaller type of cause-driven business, has specific opportunities there. And lastly is venture capital. Everybody talks about VC. Well, there's a very small group that will actually get venture funding. Everybody wants the millions of yes. But it also, keep in mind that it institutionally locks you into high growth, high burn rate. Sometimes you really give up control of the business. You have a lot more people to work with, but it is also a path to exit. I mean, if it's something you want to keep you want to run a business for 20 years, venture capital might not be you. And that leads to the last point, is that every business has a specific funding path. And you could just fund it from cash. So I just wanted you to also keep in mind that all these options are out there for you. But as you go through this and you go through the book and start to understand these things, go to networking events, get to know different newsletters and understanding all the different things that are in your area, trying to match what is best for you. And only your business can really, you guys will know that as you go through it. So now that you got some basics on starting from scratch, where now?
So we know that this is a lot of information to take in, and there's so much more that you will need and have along your journey. I mean, that's just part of being an entrepreneur. And the thing to know is that you will fail, and everyone fails on a daily basis. But the key is to fail as quickly as possible and to learn from those mistakes so that you can learn and pivot and move as fast as possible. So we created within this book a unique framework that leverages well-known concepts, so much like MVPs and Lean Startup, which we just talked about, as well as our own proprietary concepts such as the baseboard that we just reviewed. And within this framework, we have this broken up into 3 different areas. And we broke it up into elements. So we have building the foundation, we have creating the experience, and growing the dream. So within the foundation, or building the foundation, we have you as the entrepreneur and your idea, as well as what is that business solution. As you start to create the experience, it's all about what are some of your culture elements? What does your team look like? And what are some of your team elements? What is that customer experience? And then what is branding? And then as you grow the dream, it's all about funding. What is your funding mix in order to scale? What does sales and marketing look like? And what are some of those X factors that either you have control of or don't have control of? So that could be timing, that could be serendipity. And then how, at the end of the day, do you innovate and scale your business? And so we fit all of that into an equation. And I promise, and Steve promises as well, that this structure is not math. But it's around finding what are those right elements for you within each of those buckets to help customize your unique startup equation. At the end of the day, creativity is thinking up new things, and innovation is doing new things. And whether or not you're starting a business that's more of a lifestyle business, or if you're looking to create the next Uber, really taking your unique creative approach to this is going to be key in order to actually build something that's innovative and going to change the world. So within this book, the way that we built it is that there's over 140 infographics and over 40 interviews with entrepreneurs. And we've built this book for you to really choose your own adventure and create that entrepreneurial equation or mix that works for you. And part of our mission is to help 1 million entrepreneurs, because by 2020, 1 in 4 people will be an entrepreneur. So we wanted something that was visual and tangible that people can just use as a startup, essentially as a startup reference or Bible that they can use on a daily basis to help with as much of building their business as possible. Now, we have a ton of resources over at www.startupequation.com. We also have a startup launch kit if you sign up for the newsletter. So if there is more stuff that you want to help you dig into some of this MVP or baseboard and starting to build out that solution, or even just ideation, go over to there and you will find a lot of free resources.
So we're at the end of the presentation, and I know there's a lot of questions in the queue. So what we will want to do is come into the question queue here. We're going to go through here and try and address a number of stuff here. So can you mail the presentation to my mail? Okay. So there's a couple of, so what we're going to do, we're going to, we will have this as a recording, but I would recommend that you go to the website and sign up. There's all this content through the startup kit is in there. So I'm trying to process sorry, I'm trying to go through, and there's tons of questions coming in here, so I'm trying to manage this.
Well, as Steve picks out a question, so McGraw-Hill will end up sending out this webinar to everyone who signed up. So you will have this webinar, and then if you need or want the additional content or information, going over to startupequation.com is where you can get over 20 free resources to help you start and build your business.
Okay, so let's go through a couple here. So I wanted to, Ankita, thank you very much for the compliment on the presentation. We've enjoyed giving this to you guys and really helping, spread the word as the book is now in India. Your question is, how hard can it be for those types of entrepreneurs who think about helping people, which has a social approach? Ja-Naé has actually done a social-based venture, and I've done a nonprofit, and it can be. I don't think it's about how hard or harder it is. I think it's just there's different aspects to it. I think it's also about what the mission is, because I think a lot of people get lost in the nonprofit and the cause. So I think it's important to remember that without the business, there is no cause. And I think using a book like this and understanding the concepts, they're still the same. How you fund it may be a little different. Your team you have to know what you're going to do so that you can find the right team, and even if you need co-founders. You have any thoughts on that, Ja-Naé?
No, it's one of these things that no matter what business or what type of business you try to build, there's always going to be challenges, right? Those challenges change or are different depending on what your entrepreneurial approach is. So the do-gooder is the approach that you would want for that. As far as your personality type or your entrepreneurial type, that doesn't matter, really. At the end of the day, it's just identifying which one of those 9 really resonate with who you are. And why that's important is to understand, what am I bringing to the table? How do I view the world, and through what lens? What are some of my strengths and some of my weaknesses that can either boost or hinder the business? Knowing thyself is hard, but it's something that you have to do as an entrepreneur if you're going to essentially thrive and build something great.
So Nirmal asked, we mentioned Uber earlier. That's why Uber failed on many fronts in India, rather, I think, compared to the U.S., where they missed. They've actually, it's interesting, Uber runs into, any disruptive business will run into problems because the established structure that is there. Here in Boston, UberX you can take an UberX to the airport, but you can't get one. You have to have the taxi because it's just their unions. It's the way it's set up. You can do a Uber Black, but it is definitely to the city. When you think about India, Uber couldn't get a taxi license in Delhi, but may change over time. They have different ways to get the service in. I think it's also about the customer loyalty. The way it's a very price sensitive market in India, and users can quickly change. It just depends on how you build out and incentivize the driver. I think for them, it's gonna be important for all of the funding. And we talked about venture capital. They have a lot of venture capital. They can definitely outlast a lot of people and a lot of companies, but eventually they will have to be profitable. So I think it's for them right now, getting in front of as many people, getting into those different markets. So, it's a great question, but it's a good example of knowing your market, knowing your customer, adjusting to the different places that you'll have to go in different countries in this case. So,
yeah.
And the next, one on
yeah, so
entrepreneurial type.
but we've already talked about that. So, what are the major risks involved in being an entrepreneur? So Steve and I have this conversation pretty frequently, and feel free to chime in after I'm done. Everyone has a risk profile, and that changes depending on what age you are, what is your living situation, what is your work situation. So major risks are obviously being able to sustain yourself financially. Many entrepreneurs say, all right, or budding entrepreneurs, I should say, they say, all right, I'm going to do this, and they end up quitting their job, but there's no plan to subsidize that income. So one day they may have an income, and the next day they become an entrepreneur because they think that it's going to happen overnight. And being an entrepreneur and building a business is something that is not guaranteed. There's no one out there guaranteeing that your business is going to, one, make money, but two, also that it's going to be sustainable over the long term. So really understanding what is it that you need on sort of on a baseline to survive. How can you set up a plan that gives you that over, say over a year or 9 months, just so that you have a runway to get started? And then I don't want to speak for Steve, but I highly recommend that if you have a job, starting a business on the side while you still have that job. This way you can start to work out some of the kinks in knowing who your target audience is, the problem that you're trying to solve for them, and what is that core service or solution that you're trying to provide for them. All of those will help you to at least mitigate some of those risks.
Okay. So what I would also like, so there's the does ideation, so Raul asked, does ideation always start with identification of a problem?
Yes. I will say this. I see so many startups start a business because of the fact that they think it's cool and not necessarily solve a problem for a target audience. Every single business out there that's successful has solved a problem for a core target audience or customer. So finding out what is that big problem that you can solve is key to your sustainability and really to starting your business. So you have to know what that problem is, and whether or not it's powerful enough and big enough to actually build a business around.
Okay, so trying to, these are some great questions here. It's a great audience. Just trying to go through and move through. How do you build a company? There's information on building a company. Well, this is the point of this. I definitely go to the startupequation.com site. Raghav asks, how does one raise funds for the startup if it's at an incubation stage? Well, I think it's, there are different sensitivities and different types of investors at different stages. If an incubation stage, it's usually self-funded, friends and family. If you have somebody, it's also about track record. If you've done this before, it can also help with, somebody knows you can deliver, they'll put some money in. Incubation stage is that initial, maybe, you get into an accelerator program and they give you some money to allow you to live and work on the product and get it to an MVP state where you can show some traction and show how it's actually being successful to go to that next stage. And kind of a transition to that, and the next question is, what does people need to have to regarding an idea to present in front of investors? What really you have to have the pitch, but it also depends on how far along you are in the process. You could already have a prototype, and it could have some initial beta customers. You could be, just the idea itself. People can believe in the idea and maybe get you into a program that can do it. Maybe they give you some money to see how you do. But you have to definitely have the pitch. If you're an existing business, you definitely need to have your financials. You need to have your revenue model. You need to have your growth plan. You need to be able to really show how you're going to use the money, how you're going to hire, what people you need first, how you're going to execute. In the book, at the end of the book, we have this. So initially, with the seed board, we have. But into the base board, we have the seed board. And what this does is it takes all the equation elements and helps you build out a plan along with milestones. So it actually is a way for you every 6 months to really look at the business and with all the sales, marketing, all the elements of the equation. So again, if somebody asks with the website, it's startupequation.com. And, so one of the things I'm looking through some of the questions here. How to approach an angel investor carefully. I think there's a lot of opportunities. There's networking. Angel investors like ourselves. We get bombarded with requests and ideas all the time. It's a balance of being enthusiastic and obviously driven, but also not being overly aggressive, because that can turn people off. A lot of times angels will go through different channels, like. If they're part of other groups, if they go to sessions like accelerator demo days, it's personal networks. Approaching somebody randomly, you probably won't get anything. But at least if you want to be aware, make them aware, it's a way to do it to start with them versus it's a complete stranger and you just want them to give you money. That's much harder of a tactic, but I would invite you to, network, get to know the market and get to know who the investors are and really find out through the network as getting personal introductions. That's really the best way if it's on a one-to-one basis.
So Joe Abraham asks, what is our opinion about a student starting their own business during his college? Or does he or she need sufficient exposure before starting a company? And the answer is no. You can start whenever, whether or not you are in college, whether or not it's before college. I know many children entrepreneurs that do well, and depending on what they're trying to do, some are just doing little lifestyle businesses. Some are actually trying to build something that is much bigger and scale it. So there is no right time, if you will, to start a business. It's really around your passion to either solve that problem that your business is solving, or to really help the customers that you have. Because at the end of the day, if your heart is not in it, then really the sustainability of the business is really dependent on who you are and how much time and energy and passion and drive and resilience you have to bring to the table.
So Shanti asked about, they're thinking about the services company and the elements to consider for a minimum capital requirement and also the minimum capital requirement. It depends on your business. Services, just like products, you have to come up with that initial service, you test it out. Obviously people will buy it, but I actually would, maybe Ja-Naé has some thoughts on this too, is that when you test a service, you're actually putting things into practice. So you want to have all the concepts really work through, and maybe on the minimum viable product, you want to talk about some of the service.
Yeah, so there's actually a type of MVP for service in particular, and it's called the concierge MVP. And so, Shanti, what I recommend is for you to map out what is that step-by-step customer experience. How are people finding you, or how are you finding people? What happens next? always ask yourself as you're trying to walk through these steps, what happens next? And then what? And then what? To completion of that service. What is the follow-up of that service? You know, how does that customer experience look? Because once you have the flow of that customer experience, then you can start to test each of those steps within that flow to identify which of those steps really work and which of those steps do not. And you need to know which of those steps are really working for you and a customer feels very good about in comparison to where they start to fall off or things are just not working. So there are a ton of questions here, and I think we're going to try to take some of these questions and actually answer them over at startupequation.com. So expect a few blog posts and answers to some of these questions, and we will put your name next to some of these questions as we respond to them. But if you go over to www.startupequation.com, we will try to get to every single one of these questions so that you guys feel comfortable with the information that we presented, and so that you can start your business and be successful at it. And with that, we hope that you guys have a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I can just to tell you guys, I mean, thank you for coming. You know, to get in touch, here's our emails. We'll sit for a second here. I'm at the Rev Factory. We're both at the Rev Factory. Actually it should be S. Fisher and Ja-Naé, sorry, J. Duane. If they bounce back, you can also reach us on the Startup Equation site. One of the things that we'd just like to say is thank you, because you know this is the first step for many of you. It's all about exploration. It's about experimentation, and you know this is one of those things where, like Ja-Naé said, you can fail a lot, but you fail fast and you learn from it. And you know you do different ventures over the course of your life. Some will fail, some will not. But you know, we wanted to wish everyone just good luck, and please get a copy of the book and reach out and you know come to the site, get the kit. You know, we've made a lot of mistakes, and we're hoping we can share this book with you so that you can avoid them as well.
Have a great day.